Welcome to the Erasing Shame podcast, the May 2022 edition. And I am thrilled that it's the month of May. It's Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month and Mental Health Month. So we're going to talk about both. I'm joined by my special guest, Robyn Tamanaha. And she is a therapist here in Orange County. And maybe one of these days we'll meet up in person, especially now that it's post-COVID. But thank you for making time to chat with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I love the podcast. So I was so excited to do this with you. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I was inspired by Joe Rogan, and so I just wanted to have a conversation with you, not for 3 hours, just 30 minutes for the first try and see how our audience responds. And if they want more of us talking, we'd be open to making up more time for that. And you're a prolific writer and reader and podcaster, so we'll explore all of that, as well as being a therapist. So I don't know how you find all the time to do that, but let's start with the month of May, since we're here. We're recording on May 4th, so may the 4th be with you. And I hope to release it before the end of the week. But what does the month of May, what meaning does it hold for you? Are you doing anything special this month?
Yeah, I'm still making plans. I can't believe it's May already, actually. I feel like the months are going by super quickly, but love May. And for me, it's great because AAPI, like you said, AAPI and mental health. So this is wonderful. And I think for me, like, it's interesting, we have these months, that are like observances and, all that. But I feel like, for me, this is something I honor every month, and sometimes every week. So I don't know if it looks too different. I think if anything, I'm probably gonna, I have, as you can see behind me, a huge stack of books. Probably read a little more AAPI authors that have been on my TBR. But yeah, it's kind of something I already do. So, I feel like I honor that through not just like the work I do with my clients, but like connection with other AAPI and just immersing myself in everything. And I think for me, it's also, it's kind of general, like AAPI, but, keeping in mind too, like all the differences amongst us, not just, culturally, ethnicity and all that, but even, generationally, I feel like it's so complex. It's hard for me to also encompass in just like AAPI. I feel like there's so many layers, and I think maybe it'll just be me getting to know more of those layers with everybody.
Yes. Well, I'm Chinese American, and then you're Japanese American. Yeah, Issei, Sansei, Nisei, what generation?
So I believe it goes on the father's side, right? So for me, it'd be Sansei.
Well, I came to the U.S. when I was 8, so I have a traditional immigrant upbringing story. My parents run a motel and restaurant business growing up, and that's my background. And they worked hard to make a living, and then I became a computer engineer and dabbled in theology and seminary and Christian work, and wound up spending most of my time in nonprofit world. So now I'm age 55, so I'm thinking about, okay, how am I going to finish my last chapter?
That's wonderful. I love everybody's stories. I think it's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, mine's been a lot of wandering. How did you wind up being a therapist? That's not a conventional thing for Asian Americans or Japanese Americans to do.
Yeah, it's actually something I didn't know was a service people used. I didn't even know therapy was a thing. I heard of psychiatry growing up, 'cause everyone goes, I think within my family culture, it's you go to the doctor, when you're not feeling well. So I knew psychiatry and medicine. But as far as therapy, and I'm a kid of the 80s too. So think back to, what messages were like back then when it comes to mental health, mental illness. I didn't know people went to therapy. So I'm very organized. I've always had office jobs, front desk. I love those. And what ended up happening was when I was in my early 20s, I saw a job post for an admin scheduler type position. I applied, did the interview, and it was actually for a therapist in private practice.
Mm.
And so that was how I learned about therapy and of people using, services for, for their mental health. I I didn't know what I applied for. Like I know I applied for what the job tasks were, but I didn't know what therapy was. And I could tell the person didn't like knew I didn't know what exactly she did. But she was so nice, and I had a lot of energy and I love being organized. And she's like, I feel good about this. I feel good about you. I'd like to, have you work here. So she hired me on the spot, I think
That's good.
knowing that I didn't know everything. And so when I started working for her, that's when I learned what therapy was and that people called in for help. And she was a psychologist, but she also worked with like intimacy, relationships, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of
Mm.
couples and relationship work. And it was through that where I'm like, oh, like people reach out for help. Therapy is a thing, and therapy is something that people use like when they're experiencing challenges like in their life or in their relationships. So it was super transformative, especially since I was a scheduler. So I'm like, oh, what are you calling in
Mm-hmm.
for? And I'd hear it all. And I'm like, wow, so you could do that. I didn't know until then that you could do that. And at the time, I had already been accepted to a health and human services program, a really good one. And I was going to do public health track. So that would have been very interesting during this time.
Mm-hmm.
First semester in, I was like, this isn't, really for me. I wasn't too interested in it. And so what always stuck in the back of my mind was the therapist that I worked for in private practice. I worked for her for I think a year and a half. And I'm like, that was really cool. I want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I changed my major to psychology and I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do whatever I can to get to the point where I also own my own private practice, and I help others and, others also, with AAPI or at least
Mm-hmm.
community, because it was like eye-opening for me. So
Yes.
that's how this all happened. It was just a kind of this one experience that I had that just opened up everything for me.
Yes, but how did your family react?
Um, they, my My mom was always like my cheerleader. She was always super supportive of like everything that I
Mm-hmm.
do. Everybody else, they were kind of like confused, just like how I was like, what? Because in my family, especially one side of my family is very academic. I mean,
Okay,
doctors, engineers as well, like kind of more like that,
there you go.
education. So
Sure.
this was like, they're like, okay. But I mean, I could tell also they didn't know what it was. And even still,
Okay.
not really knowing the nuances of what I do, but there was never anything like I felt bad about or anything. It was
Okay.
just definitely unknown territory for them. So it's interesting also doing this work, and also having people that may not know the full, like the ins and outs of
Mm-hmm.
maybe like when you're a teacher, like you know what those things are.
Yes.
And what I do is so different that they're like, okay, kind of understand, not really,
Yes. Well, so much of it is behind this curtain and this veil of uh, ignorance and just not knowing. And then with our Asian American cultures, there's this shame and stigma so that we don't want to learn more about it. And it's just really uncomfortable. And meanwhile, there's been a lot that American society has learned about shame through best-selling author Brene Brown. But there's a whole another layer, many layers and nuances as Asian Americans and Japanese Americans. And that's the kind of conversations we've been having here at Erasing Shame, is unpacking that and demystifying it and cutting past the jargon, because there's a lot of psychological jargon too. And so I'd be curious to find out what has been helpful for you as you work with Japanese Americans in particular to help them get that first appointment, because the first meeting is really, really hard given all their family and cultural background.
Yeah, I do a lot. So there's many things. Like one is like the blogs that I write. I'm essentially putting out the words for others. I remember when I reflect back when I was younger, I didn't have the words for a lot of things that I was experiencing because, I didn't have it they didn't have this modeled for me, how to identify emotions and really kind of go with it and, express it and, reflect on it. So I think, one, it's the blogs that I do and the content that I put out and just putting out the information. And I think coming from someone who is API is maybe, helpful for some because there's like an API therapist like talking about these things. And then also just really, clarifying any, misconceptions and also maybe even standards or expectations, that have been, I think, placed upon us forever that may not always serve. I always think like with Japanese Americans too, especially like the whole like model minority, myth. And I even fell into that myself where like keeping it all together or looking like I'm okay, and when I reflect back to even, my grandparents, even part of the Nisei, on one side of my family is like, that's what they did. Like you just, you kind of have it all together, don't really like talk about things. And that's what I experienced growing up was like, I got different messages on not talking about things. So it's giving people the words, even if it's through something that they may read, on my website. And then when people do call me for services, I really just thank them and for reaching out because I know that takes a lot of strength. And I mean, sometimes people are looking for like 3-4 months before they even make that phone call, and really like honoring that. Like, I appreciate that this is a really big step for you, whether or not you go with me or somebody else, and just giving them a lot because even my thing is whether or not someone starts therapy with me, I feel like that first phone call though is huge. And that is the start to everything for somebody, even if they decide to go elsewhere for services. So I'm going to make sure that they have a validating and empowering experience even through that phone consultation.
Yes. Well, it took me nearly a decade for me to get my first counseling appointment. And so I was what you might call high functioning. And I always felt sad and depressed. That was just my default emotion. But I didn't know that you could get help to get out of that because I was still getting good grades and I was still holding the job. And so I'm functioning. What's the problem? And from a survival mentality, that might be okay, but you're definitely giving up a lot of quality of life and struggling unnecessarily when there is help.
Yeah. And that's a huge, it's a huge challenge because I think, and I hear it a lot where it's like, and that's sometimes one of the kind of things I work through with people is, being like quote unquote bad enough, or it has to be like, look a certain way to receive help or for it to matter, and for everything, it's a spectrum. But I always say like, if you're feeling it, it matters and it's an alert. I think of it kind of like a check engine light, if your oil's low, or that light comes on, the car will still run, but like, how are you feeling? Like, I wonder how that car's doing as they're moving along, Yeah.
And that's what a therapist can help diagnose.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the expertise you bring. And then you can provide different modalities, as they say, different techniques to bring about healing and wellness. Okay, now there's a buzzword that's kind of swimming around these days on the interwebs: culturally competent and race conscious therapy. Now, you've got a couple degrees in psychology, but perhaps it didn't really equip you with the layers of being Asian American and Asian cultures. So what have you learned over your past decade of working with Asian Americans and being Asian American yourself?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot to learn from others. When I reflect back, even on my courses, whether undergrad or graduate, Asian American section was small, and I felt like it needed to be a lot longer.
Yes,
because even as I referred to in the beginning, like there's some similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. And I think when I'm working with clients or the people that I meet or colleagues or whoever, I'm always keeping that in mind. Like, I'm Japanese American, and I kind of know, from personal experience and educationally what things may look like. But I also want to make sure that I'm attending to the uniqueness of someone's experience, because it could even be, I can be sitting across from a fellow Japanese American, and theirs could actually be quite different, even the family dynamics, which is a huge part of things.
Yes.
So I keep that in mind, where it's like making sure not to even generalize my own, those that are, like me, and just really sitting with them and getting to know their unique story and what it may have been like for them.
Yeah, and I've been in therapy for nearly 20 years because I manage my bipolar disorder. And I'm very grateful for that support, very grateful for the medication that I need to be well regulated. And I'm in a good season right now. So grateful to experience life with less struggle, because I know what it's like to be in the midst of heavy struggle for years, months and years also. And one of the things I appreciate about a therapist who's Asian American versus non-Asian, and I've worked with both, is I spend less time explaining myself because they already understand the cultural background and the family dynamics. Whereas when I've worked with non-Asians, it's like I spend 2 or 3 or 4 sessions just explaining myself, and well, it's kind of a waste of time and money in that sense. And then they don't really get it because they haven't had that lived experience, and that's such a valuable thing. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and two, thanks for saying that, in sharing that, because there is that piece, that understanding, and also, how that informs the work that we do,
Yes.
taking in those things, and like you said, those modalities, also making sure that it is competent, sensitive, and actually a match for, or how will it be a match, for the client and their experience and their journey. So
So my burning question is, knowing that you have a interest and you've really focused on helping others with bipolar disorder, particularly bipolar 1, help me understand the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. I'm bipolar 2.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the big one is what you had mentioned, where you had said, like, still working, functional in a way. So the biggest difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 is that, I mean, one is the timeline of the manic hypomanic episode, like the days, is it lasting a week or less than that? But a big thing is that the functionality, where someone who's living with bipolar 2, they may not know to for a while, because working fine, getting things done, the mood's feeling different, and in some ways, sometimes the hypomania helps with the work, increases that. Sometimes it enhances it. So it mainly comes down to the functionality, and that, like, they'll still, for the most part, do work, relationships, all that, but they will still be distressed. So it's not taking away, I want to kind of make sure not to compare too much. It doesn't take away from the distressing experience of an episode. It's just the functionality looks different. Whereas the bipolar 1, there will be a lot more heavy impairment or significant things that have happened when it comes to job, relationships, daily life, even maybe, and taking care of themselves. So that's the biggest one.
Okay, sounds like bipolar 1's more severe.
I mean,
when struggling with some episodes,
some would say so. That's
or
why
a difference in duration.
Yeah. So the difference in duration and maybe how much it impacts the person's life, but so but for both, it is still very distressing to experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're both very hard. I've read the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual, and I just can't figure out how to decipher it in a way that I can understand without the extra training. So I was just curious, well, why even have 1 and 2 when they're both they both describe the same similar kinds of symptoms, similar kinds of struggle, and that's why they're both bipolar. But there's also the 1 and 2. So one does have some distinguishing marks and vice versa.
Yeah, it's a spectrum, and
Yeah. Okay.
And I think as far as your question, like why even have it? Like, I mean, it's purposes are for something different, like insurance and that really, I mean, that's like a whole nother thing.
Yes, it is.
But yeah. Mm.
Okay. Well, thank you for adding some focus on that. And I do really appreciate how much content you do put online. And one of my favorite things that you've put online, and I don't know what your thinking is going forward, is conversations with therapists. I thought that was wonderful, just how you answer each question, and it's bite-sized and it's clear. So thank you for doing that. And now you're still doing 2 podcasts. How do you find the energy to do your 2 podcasts? Tell us about each one.
Yeah, thank you. So I have 2, like you said. So one is Books Between Sessions. I started that in 2018, I believe, because I'm a huge book reader. And that one, I didn't intend to be a podcaster. I'm a podcast listener. I was doing vlogs, like the ones you saw in Conversations with a Therapist on YouTube. And somebody, 2 people, one was a therapist and one was somebody in education, was like, you do all these vlogs, why don't you do a podcast? And I'm like, why would I do a podcast? I don't really want to do a podcast. But I thought about it for like 4 months. And I was like, you know what? Why not? I think that'd be great. Another way to like put out content. So I started Books Between Sessions because mainly it focuses on mental health and mental illness books. And there's so many good ones out there, even ones for middle grade and like young adults. So there's so many books that I want people to know about, which is why I started that podcast. And I had been reading a ton of books anyways. And then this year, February, the first episode for Open Mind Night came out. That's my second podcast. And that one is just more general and where I get to talk with people who have lived experience or professionals or companies. So Books Between Sessions is very specific, and I speak with authors. I wanted to catch a wider audience, and with this pandemic, also just connect with more. And this is also my way to do this podcasting world. While at the same time, putting out even more content with like all different types of topics, all different lived experiences, and you don't have to be an author for that. So it's been fun. It is a lot of work. Fortunately, I'm super organized. I have a system and a workflow for everything. And I structure my time. I have certain blocks of the week that I'm doing specific things. If it wasn't for that, this would be really hard because I'm like a one-woman show here. I do it all. I do the promotions. I do the audio editing. I outsource for video editing, but so I've used technology to my advantage too. So a lot of things are streamlined, and it's just me really adhering to my schedule. And also too, like Open Mind Night, I'm just starting to record for again. I bulk recorded a ton of episodes back in 2021 before it went live. I took a few months break. So, for me, everything I'm doing is self-imposed, and all these deadlines are self-imposed. So I use that to my advantage where if I'm feeling tired, all right, I don't have to record right now. I can just chill or do whatever. So also keeping in mind what works for me and making sure to really check in with myself, because I'm super driven. I get very excited about doing these creative things. So I have to make sure to monitor, actually tone myself down and monitor. But yeah, so organization, I think is the best thing, and has helped me get through it, really.
Fantastic. Well, talking about books, what's on your nightstand? Share a couple titles with us.
I have so many. So
grab a few. Let's hear some titles.
Because these are ones I'm actually, what are these for? I'm kind of late in the game in one of them. This one.
That's okay.
Crying in H Mart.
Oh, yes.
So I'm currently reading this. The memoir. It's about like grief and loss. She's also a singer.
Yes, that's right. Well, I'm part of the Asian Mental Health Collective, on the board of that, and we just had a online conference on May 1st called Transformation, and she was one of our panelists.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, so
Okay.
I'll
That is
add a
so
link in the show notes, and it was recorded, so you can also watch her in a live conversation about the book.
I'm definitely gonna watch that. And then this one, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. Trying to
Mm,
play here.
hmm.
So this is like self-help. I'm actually reading this for my podcast, but also just in general. So it's kind of like,
Hmm.
what the adults could be
Important.
doing. Yeah.
Yes.
This one, The
Right.
Beauty of Your Face, also
Oh,
fiction.
yeah.
I'm in chapter 2. It's pretty heavy.
Okay.
Muslim American. There's like a
Uh-huh.
unfortunate thing that happens at a school, and all
Mm-hmm.
that. And then this is actually,
Good.
I said, I think I'm going to read, maybe more AAPI, books. So
Hmm.
this is actually one of the ones I'm reading for this.
Oh, yeah, that one's gold. Yes.
Yeah.
The
So this
Making
is,
of Asian America. AAPI.
yeah.
Mhm.
So this is my May must finish book. I started.
It's
So
perfect month to read that. Yes.
yeah. Yeah. So these are the books, and, I'm surrounded by them all the time. So, I'm
Yes.
always reading multiple books at one time too. So
Yes. I have a habit of that, but it's not a big habit. I've found myself gravitating more towards audiobooks and podcasting because I can listen to those with my eyes closed. I use my eyes all the time being at work because I'm in computer work, So, well, to close, what do you do for self-care? You've mentioned being organized. You like to read. What do you do for your body? Because there's a physical part of our self-care that I'm discovering is really important. So
yeah.
for me, it's walking and breathing.
I do a lot of walking. With
Mhm.
it being spring now, I'm going to try to get back into hiking. I used to hike a lot. Especially when I went to school up in NorCal, I did tons of hiking. So I want to get back into that since the weather's nice.
Mhm.
And for me, like I said, I'm organized, especially with my time. So I have kind of like a daily routine. I don't do any work before 11 a.m. just because I like my mornings to hang out and listen to music and slowly drink my
Nice.
coffee. Um, and I monitor myself with my work. I don't see more than 5 clients a day. I'm done. And then I make sure to keep connections with my friends, even now, and I have like my nighttime routine. I do a lot of more restorative calming type of
Mm.
activities to kind of wind down.
Mhm.
Like even like this, like for me, candles is like a huge thing too. So being an organized person, I have blocks of time for self-care. And when I'm just not doing work, my days off are my days off. I'm not even logging onto my email, because
Mhm.
when I see something, I'm like, okay. And, I can easily just go with it. So getting outside, seeing people, doing something. I actually, one of my plans for the next few weeks, I have to look into it. I want to try to learn archery, like Hunger Games.
Wow,
I've
that's
been
so
wanting that for
cool.
a while.
Yeah.
But during the pandemic, I was like, oh, I'm not really going out, just something like random and fun, so I try
Yes.
to keep it kind of not sporadic, but I try to weave in like fun things because I used to be super physical. NorCal, I was rock climbing, hiking, I was doing kickboxing. I am more of an active
Whoa.
person, but not like a gym person. Like I have to be doing things that are like kind of fun, you know?
Yeah, not
Um,
just routine like
I
pumping iron. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can't at
Yeah.
all. I like to, especially with nature or just being
Uh-huh.
outside.
Uh-huh.
I love that. So that's something I've been getting more back into.
That's so amazing. Well, I'm energized uh, hearing, kind of living through you vicariously. I don't quite have the energy to be that physical, but I do walk and Peloton and
Oh yeah,
hike. So
great.
that's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this lively conversation. And I know you're active online. For our audio listeners, would you go ahead and say your website address, your Instagram, and anywhere else you're active?
Yeah. My private practice website is robyntamanahatherapy.com. And then I have Instagrams for everything. So same thing, Instagram, Robyn Tamanaha Therapy. Books Between Sessions, same handle for social media, including Instagram. We have a website, so booksbetweensessions.com. And then Open My Night, that Instagram is Open My Night Pod, Pod. And everything, there's also links in the bio for all of those access anything. So definitely check everything out. I put out a lot of blogs too, every once in a while, just, and all these things are free, too, keeping that in mind. So I do that for a reason. I feel like, part of my purpose is to help, and to help decrease stigma, and that, it's okay. So definitely take advantage of all these free resources.
Yeah, subscribe to Robyn's email. She gives bonus content for members only. So thank you for doing that. Again, the links to everything she just mentioned is going to be in the show notes at erasingshame.com. Subscribe and add a review on iTunes so that others can connect with our tribe of Erasing Shame. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next month.